The smell of gasoline had always been the smell of freedom, a prelude to the roar of an engine and the blur of the open road. That was until the night it became the smell of a cage. He never imagined the loudest sound in his life wouldn't be a screaming turbo, but the quiet, relentless buzz of a needle carving a new identity into his own skin. The night air over the port of Los Angeles was a heavy blanket, thick with the taste of salt, rust, and gasoline that clung to the back of Leo's throat. This was the main line, an unsanctioned stretch of tarmac where gods were not found in the heavens, but forged in steel and fury under the sickly orange glow of industrial lamps. Tonight, the man they called Ghost was preparing to make his sermon. His chariot, a heavily modified 1992 Nissan 240 SX, was a ghost of a different sort. Its shell was a patchwork of matte gray primer and carbon fiber, an ethereal shape scarred with the war wounds of 100 victories. Under the ugly lights, the car looked almost insubstantial, as if it could phase through the very air. It was more than a machine. It was his voice, his proof of existence in the city's anonymous sprawl. A gloved hand slid over the cold fender, feeling the low, hungry thrum of the idling engine. Each piston cycle was a heartbeat, a frantic rhythm that matched the hammering in his own chest. 50 yards away across the improvised starting line sat Zane's machine, a midnight black Dodge Viper. It didn't thrum, it growled, a deep, guttural sound of pure power that promised violence. It was a king's car, and Zane was the king. He leaned against the Viper's door, his gaze fixed not on his car but directly on Leo. Zane was a man of sharp angles and coiled stillness, a predator conserving energy. Even from this distance, his stare felt heavy, like that of an owner sizing up property. Tonight's wager was for everything. The law of the main line was simple. You raced for slips. Pink slip for pink slip. But Zane didn't just want cars, he wanted souls. The stakes, whispered through the assembled crowd of racers and adrenaline junkies, were legendary. Car and fealty. The loser didn't just walk away. They were absorbed into Zane's orbit, stripped of their name, their ride, and their standing to become mechanics, lookouts, or runners. Leo, the independent ghost who appeared, won and vanished, had resisted for months. But Zane had systematically dismantled his world, choking his supply lines for rare parts and blocking him from high-stakes races until this one night was the only option left. It was a final, desperate gamble to reclaim his name or lose it forever. A figure, Zane's Lieutenant Marcus, detached from the king's side and walked into the space between the cars, holding up a greasy shop rag. The crowd hushed, a collective breath held in the humid air. Leo slid into the cockpit of his 240 SX, the worn leather of the bucket seat molding around him. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the steering wheel. The suffocating smell of oil and fuel was the scent of the trap. A glance in the rearview mirror revealed his own eyes, wide and dark, reflecting the chaos of the glowing gauges. The point of no return had already passed. This was just the fall. Marcus raised the rag. The world narrowed to a tunnel. A mile down the straight, a pair of flickering flares marked the finish, two tiny, hellish stars in the industrial dark. The Viper's engine roared, a deafening challenge that shook the very ground. Leo's turbocharger answered with a high-pitched whistle, the only voice he had left. The rag dropped. Leo's foot slammed the clutch as his hand rammed the shifter into first. Tires screamed, tortured rubber clawing for purchase on the asphalt. The 240 SX shot forward like a gray bullet. For one breathless second, he was ahead, pulling a car length on the Viper. The crowd became a smear of color in his periphery. Hope, fragile and foolish, fluttered in his chest. The engine screamed at the red line. A perfect shift into second and the chassis shuddered. He could feel every crack in the road telegraphing up through the stiff suspension and into his spine. He was one with the machine, but the Viper was a different kind of beast, one of brute, overwhelming force. In his side mirror, the black car was a growing void, patiently eating the distance. Zane was letting him have his moment, a brief taste of the lead. It was part of the cruelty. Halfway down the straight, the flares grew larger. Leo's engine shrieked, pushed to its absolute limit, his foot welded to the floor. The boost gauge quivered deep in the red. He risked another glance at the mirror. The Viper was on his bumper, its quad headlights like the eyes of a pursuing demon. Then Zane made his move. The Viper pulled out effortlessly, its V10 engine unleashing a sound that tore the night in half. It didn't just pass him, it eclipsed him. The sheer size of it filled his vision, a wall of black steel blotting out the world. Panic, hot and sharp, flared in Leo's gut. He did something he never did. He hesitated, the thought of lifting off the accelerator flashing through his mind for a single microsecond. The thought was a betrayal. In that instant of weakness, his fate was sealed. The Viper surged past. The red flares rushed toward them. Zane was a full car length ahead, then two. It was over. The primal, triumphant roar of the Viper's engine was the only sound in the world as it crossed the finish line. Leo's own engine seemed to whine in defeat as he shot past the flares a second later, the whistle of his turbo sounding like a dying gasp. He let the car coast into the darkness beyond the lights, the sounds of the crowd fading behind him. His whole body trembled with a toxic cocktail of adrenaline and despair as he gripped the wheel. He hadn't just lost a race. He had been executed. Leo sat in the suffocating silence of his car as the engine ticked and cooled. It felt like an eternity before headlights washed over his interior. The Viper parked directly in front of him, blocking any thought of escape. Zane's door opened. Slowly, Leo killed the engine. The silence that followed was a crushing weight. He stepped out on unsteady legs. The crowd had migrated to the finish line, forming a semicircle around the two cars, their faces lit by the high beams. They were spectators at a funeral, his funeral. Zane walked toward him, his boots crunching on loose gravel. He stopped a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Ghost," Zane said, his voice a calm, gentle thing that was more terrifying than any yell. "A fitting name. You evaporate so quickly." Leo couldn't answer, his throat a tight knot of shame. "A deal is a deal," Zane continued, gesturing to the 240 SX. "She's mine now, the keys." Leo's hand went to his pocket. The metal key was cold, like he was pulling out a piece of his own skeleton. He held it out. Zane didn't take it. He just stared at the outstretched, trembling hand. "That's only half of it," Zane said softly. The crowd murmured, leaning in. "You know the terms, the car and fealty." Leo's eyes burned. "I'm not your mechanic." A flicker of amusement crossed Zane's face. "No, you're not. Your talent is wasted on changing oil. What you are is an example." He turned slightly, addressing the crowd as much as Leo. "This is what happens when you fly too high, when you think you're untouchable. The main line has rules. It has a hierarchy. You challenge the top. You risk more than your ride. You risk your name." He turned back to Leo, his gaze sharp and penetrating. "Your name is gone. Ghost is dead. From now on, you're just a reminder." "Come with me," Zane said. It was not a request. He turned and started walking toward a massive, corrugated steel warehouse that loomed at the edge of the port complex. It was his domain, part garage, part clubhouse, part throne room. For a moment, Leo stood frozen. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to disappear into the night. But where would he go? His car was gone. His reputation was shattered. He was a racer with no ride, a ghost with no machine to haunt. He looked at the faces in the crowd and saw no sympathy, only morbid curiosity and grim satisfaction. They were vultures, and he was the carrion. With leaden feet, he followed Zane. The crowd parted for them as if he were a leper. As he walked, he heard someone from Zane's crew get into his 240 SX. His engine roared back to life, its voice now obeying another master. The sound was a physical blow. He didn't look back. He couldn't. The walk to the warehouse was the longest of his life. The massive roll-up door was partially open, spilling a cold white light onto the cracked asphalt. Inside, the shapes of cars in various states of assembly were visible, metallic skeletons in a morgue. This was where cars came to be reborn or to die. Leo felt he was about to do the same. The inside of the garage was cavernous and surprisingly clean, smelling of welding fumes, paint, and power. Exotic car bodies rested on stands and engines hung from hoists, a pantheon of automotive gods. But Zane didn't lead him to the main floor. He led him toward a small, unmarked door in the back corner. "In here," Zane said, pushing the door open. Leo hesitated. The air that drifted out was different. It didn't smell of oil or metal. It smelled sterile, like a clinic. The scent of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol began to seep into his bones, a dread colder than the shame he already felt. "What is this?" Leo asked, his voice a dry rasp. "Collateral," Zane replied, his hand on Leo's shoulder, guiding him firmly through the doorway. "A receipt for your education." The room was a shock. It was a stark white box, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet, lit by humming fluorescent panels overhead. There was no clutter, no grease stains. In the center of the room sat a single black leather reclining chair, looking disturbingly like something from a dentist's office or worse. Next to it, on a rolling stainless steel tray, lay a collection of tools that did not belong in a garage. A tattoo machine, its black cord coiled like a snake. Pots of ink, green soap in a spray bottle, a box of latex gloves. Leo stopped dead, his pounding heart seeming to stop altogether. He stared at the setup, his mind struggling to connect the race, the loss, and this sterile white room. "You've got to be kidding me," he breathed. Zane closed the door behind them. The click of the latch echoed in the small space. "I don't kid about business, and you, my friend, are now my business." Zane walked to the steel tray and picked up the tattoo machine, weighing it in his hand as if admiring a fine weapon. "Words are cheap," he began, his voice low and conversational. "Reputations fade. People forget who won and who lost last week. The memory of this place is short, but I'm a collector. I collect cars, I collect talent, and I collect debts. And debts need to be properly recorded." He finally looked at Leo, his eyes dark and intense. "Losing your car, that's temporary. You can always get another one. Losing your pride, you can swallow that. But a brand, a mark, that's a permanent record. It tells a story long after the whispers have died down. It tells everyone who you are, who you belong to." "You're going to tattoo me?" Leo's voice was incredulous, laced with rising panic. "Like a piece of livestock." "Don't be so dramatic," Zane said, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips. "Think of it as a membership fee. You wanted to play in the big leagues. Well, this is the cost of entry, or in your case, the cost of exit." He set the machine down with a soft click. "Everyone who loses to me on a mainline challenge gets one. It's the rule you didn't know you were agreeing to." Zane picked up a piece of paper from the tray. A stencil print. He held it up for Leo to see. The image was simple, brutal, and ingenious in its cruelty. It was a piston, rendered in a gritty mechanical style, but it was broken. A jagged crack ran through the piston head, and the connecting rod was snapped and bent at an unnatural angle. It was the ultimate symbol of catastrophic failure. An engine's broken heart. Leo stared at it, the blood draining from his face. It was an artist's rendering of what had just happened to his life, a perfect mechanical metaphor for his own shattering defeat. "Every engine has a breaking point," Zane said, his voice a predatory purr. "You found yours tonight. This is your trophy." He put the stencil down and pulled on a pair of black latex gloves. The snap of the rubber against his wrist was sharp and final. The chair, Leo. Leo's body was frozen, but his mind was a screaming race. This was insane. This was assault. He could fight, refuse. He was bigger than Zane, maybe stronger. He could try to push his way out, make a run for it. But the image of the crowd outside flooded his mind. Their cold, watchful eyes, the utter finality of his defeat. He had nowhere to run and no one to run to. Zane hadn't just beaten him on the road. He had dismantled his entire existence in the space of an hour. This room, this chair, this needle, it was just the last turn of the screw. He looked at Zane, who was now calmly cleaning a patch of skin on his own forearm with an alcohol wipe, as if preparing for a minor procedure. Zane wasn't threatening him with violence. He didn't have to. The violence was already done. This was the ritualistic aftermath. His power was absolute, and they both knew it. Fighting back would just be a messy, undignified delay of the inevitable. Another failure, this one physical and bloody. A strange, horrifying logic began to form in his mind. The only path forward was to submit, to see it through, to let the punishment be completed. Slowly, as if moving through water, Leo walked to the chair. The black leather was cold against his back as he sat down, a profound sense of detachment washing over him. He felt like he was watching a movie about someone else. He had lost control so completely that his own body no longer felt like his own. He was just an object, waiting to be marked. Zane approached, holding the stencil and a bottle of solution. His expression was no longer amused, but one of intense, focused concentration, like a surgeon or an artist. "Where everyone can see it," Zane said, more to himself than to Leo. "A reminder. To you and to them." His cool fingers touched the side of Leo's neck, tilting his head to expose the bare, vulnerable skin below his ear, along the line of his jaw. Leo flinched, a jolt of electricity shooting through him. "Stay still," Zane commanded in a low whisper. Leo squeezed his eyes shut. He felt the slick, cold liquid of the stencil solution on his skin, then the crinkle and press of the paper as Zane held it firmly in place. When he peeled it away, Leo knew the outline was there, the blueprint for his shame. Zane stepped back to admire his work. Perfect. Leo opened his eyes. He didn't dare look in a mirror. He didn't need to. He could feel the phantom shape of it on his skin, a cold purple stain. The broken piston. His new face. Zane picked up the tattoo machine. He inserted a needle cartridge, dipped it in black ink, and pressed the foot pedal. The buzz started. A low, angry hum that filled the small room and vibrated through the floor, up the chair, and into Leo's bones. It was the sound of a mechanical hornet closing in. Leo's hands gripped the armrests, his knuckles turning white. His breathing was shallow, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Zane's free hand rested on his shoulder, holding him steady. "The first line is the worst," he said, his voice right next to Leo's ear. "After that, you just go numb." Then came the needle. It wasn't a prick. It was a sharp, searing fire, 1,000 tiny razors dragging through his skin at once. Leo gasped, his whole body arching against the chair. The pain was white-hot and immediate. It wasn't just the pain of a needle. It was the pain of humiliation, of being branded, of a final, irreversible violation. It was the feeling of his old self being violently carved away. A single tear escaped his clenched eyelid and traced a hot path down his temple. He bit down hard on his lip, tasting blood. He would not scream. He would not give Zane the satisfaction. That was the only scrap of control he had left. Time dissolved into a cycle of pain and the relentless buzz of the machine. The world shrank to the small patch of skin on his neck and the fiery agony being etched into it. The initial sharpness gave way to a deep, grinding ache as the needle moved, lining, shading, filling. Each pass was a fresh wave of torment. Leo focused on his breathing, trying to mentally escape the chair. He thought of his car, of flying down an empty highway at dawn, the world a blur of color, the engine a perfect roar. He remembered the feeling of a perfect drift, that moment of controlled chaos when the car was an extension of his will. These memories were his only anesthetic, but they were tainted now. The images flickered and died, replaced by the grinning skull of the broken piston. The roar of the engine was drowned out by the buzz of the needle. Zane wasn't just marking his skin. He was invading his memories, rewriting his past with this new, ugly truth. He could feel the blood and excess ink being wiped away with a rough paper towel, the raw skin stinging from the abrasion. Then the buzzing would start again, the fire reigniting on a new section. He was disassociating, floating somewhere above his own body, a spectator to his own desecration. He was Ghost again, but this time he was haunting his own flesh. After what could have been minutes or an eternity, the buzzing stopped. The silence that rushed in was deafening, heavier and more complete than before. Leo remained perfectly still, his eyes closed, every nerve ending in his neck screaming. He could feel the heat radiating from the tattoo, a phantom limb of pain. "Done!" Zane's voice was flat, devoid of triumph. It was the voice of a man concluding a transaction. Leo heard the clink of the machine on the tray and the squeak of latex gloves being pulled off. A cool, soothing balm was spread over the raw tattoo, a small, pointless mercy that only made the pain sharper by contrast. "Look," Zane commanded. He didn't want to. To see it would be to accept it, to make it real. But the command was absolute. Slowly, mechanically, Leo pushed himself up from the chair on weak legs. Zane held a small, unframed mirror. Leo forced himself to meet his own gaze. His face was pale, his eyes hollowed out, his lip swollen where he'd bitten it. And there, on the side of his neck, was the mark. It was bigger than he had imagined, a stark, black and gray wound against his pale skin. The broken piston. It was expertly done, the lines clean, the shading precise. Its quality was part of the insult. This wasn't some crude scratch. It was a professional, artistic monument to his failure. He stared at his reflection, at this stranger with the broken thing on his neck. He didn't recognize the man in the mirror. Ghost was dead. Leo was dead. This new person was something Zane had created. Zane lowered the mirror. He watched Leo with an analytical expression, as if observing the results of an experiment. The psychological breakdown was complete. The transformation was successful. Leo touched his neck, his fingers gingerly tracing the raised, swollen outline of the tattoo through the layer of balm. It was real. It was part of him now, as permanent as bone. A wave of nausea and a profound, bottomless shame washed over him. He felt exposed, violated, forever defined by his single worst moment. He stumbled back and leaned against the cold wall of the white room, sliding down to the floor. He buried his face in his hands, not to cry, but to hide from the sterile lights, from Zane's watchful eyes, from the permanent truth now grafted onto his skin. The smell of antiseptic, ink, and his own blood filled his senses. It was the smell of his own branding. Zane left him there, leaving the door ajar. The harsh light from the main garage spilled in, creating a long shadow on the floor. Leo sat in the silence, listening to the distant sounds of tools clanking, of men talking and laughing. Life was going on out there in a world he no longer belonged to. He stayed on the floor for a long time, the pain in his neck a dull, constant throb. It was a beacon, a pulse reminding him with every beat of his heart what he had become. He was no longer a racer. He was a symbol, a warning, Zane's property. Eventually, the initial shock subsided, replaced by a hollow, empty calm. The despair was too vast to be felt all at once. It was a cold ocean, and he was just floating in it, numb.